Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I have always been a man of simple habits, a creature of repetition. My world operates on a quiet, predictable rhythm. The alarm, a soft chime, not a jarring buzz, sounds at 6:05 a.m. Not 6, not 6:10, always 6:05. The floorboards are cool under my bare feet as I make my way to the kitchen. The Chemex brewer sits waiting on the counter, cleaned from the night before. I measure the beans by weight, not by scoop, 24 grams. The water is heated to precisely 202 degrees Fahrenheit. While it brews, the world outside comes into focus through the radio. NPR. The low, steady murmur of the news is the soundtrack to my morning. I adjust my shirt collar in the reflection of the microwave door, button my cuffs, and review the day's agenda on my phone. Each gesture, rehearsed, each movement, a note in a familiar song played every single day. This constancy, I believed, was my strength. It was the foundation upon which everything else was built. I had lived with Lyra for almost 8 years. We never made it to an altar, never signed a government document, but in every way that mattered, we were married. More married than some couples I knew who had spent a fortune on rings and ceremonies. I paid the bills on time, always. The car was washed every other Saturday. I'd watch the same romantic comedies she loved, the ones with the predictable endings, just to see the corner of her mouth turn up in a smile. I thought this steadfastness, was a solid pillar, an anchor in the chaos of life. I wasn't a man of grand romantic gestures. I never filled the room with roses or whisked her away on spontaneous trips. But I was faithful in my presence. I was simply there, a constant. Lyra, on the other hand, she was pure impulse. Pure, beautiful, chaotic impulse. She was the wind. I was the ground. She'd change her mind halfway through painting a room, leaving a wall half lilac, half beige for weeks. She'd quit jobs that no longer excited her, walking away from a steady paycheck with a shrug and a smile, confident something new was just around the corner. She'd dye her hair on a whim, from blonde to black to a fiery red. Turning the page, she'd say, without ever knowing which book she was reading. I never saw this as a problem. On the contrary, I believed we were complementary opposites. I kept the ground firm beneath our feet. She blew the winds of change that kept our lives from growing stale. I was the harbor. She was the ship, always eager to explore, but always knowing where to return. That's what I told myself, anyway. That Tuesday began like any other. The 6:05 alarm, the 24 grams of coffee, the low murmur of the news. I left for work, and she was still asleep, a tangle of limbs and dark hair against the white sheets. When I came home that evening, the house was quiet. I prepared my usual meal. Rice, grilled chicken, steamed vegetables. Simple. Consistent. I was sitting at the kitchen table, midway through my plate, when she appeared. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, framed by the soft light from within. She was wearing a red dress. A tight, blood-red dress I'd never seen before. Her feet were in heels that made her seem impossibly tall, impossibly elegant. I looked up for a second, my fork hovering over my plate. I smiled. "Where are you going all dressed up?" I asked, though I already thought I knew the answer. Her best friend, Fiona, was the only one who could coax her into heels on a Tuesday. Lyra laughed, a light, airy sound that always seemed to fill whatever space she was in. "Just dinner with Fiona," she said. "She's had a rough week." She walked over, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She leaned down and kissed my forehead. Her perfume was different. Something floral and exotic. "Don't wait up," she whispered. She grabbed her purse from the counter and left in a hurry, as she always did. The front door clicked shut, and the house was quiet again. I stayed there, finishing my meal. No rush. The silence didn't bother me. It was familiar, comfortable. I thought nothing of it. It was just another Tuesday. After washing the dishes and wiping down the counter, a sudden craving hit me. Dessert. Specifically, the apple pie from the little family-run diner near my office. It was one of my few indulgences, a small, calculated deviation from the routine. The place was called the Corner Booth. It was one of those spots where the waitress, a kind woman named Marge, knew my order before I even sat down. A slice of apple pie, a la mode, and a black coffee. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. Marge gave me a familiar nod from behind the counter. I slid into my usual booth, the worn vinyl cool against my back. While I was waiting, A man walking past my table stopped. He squinted for a moment, and then a slow grin spread across his face. Declan? Declan Hayes? I looked up. It took me a second to place him. Older, a bit heavier, but the eyes were the same. Jasper? I asked. Jasper Croft? It was him, an old friend from high school. We hadn't seen each other in at least a decade. We exchanged quick, clumsy greetings, a handshake that turned into a half-hug. He slid into the booth opposite me. We fell into easy conversation, the way you can only do with people who knew you before you became who you are now. We talked about work, about how the city had changed, about getting older. So, you settled down? Married? Kids? He asked, fiddling with a paper napkin. Not married, but I've been with someone for a long time. Lyra, I said. The name felt good on my tongue. Solid. No kids, just a quiet life. That's the best kind. He nodded. My wife, she's always on the go. In fact, he trailed off, looking at his watch. I'm just killing time before I have to pick her up from the airport. She's been in London for the last month for a big project. London, huh? That's exciting, I said politely. Marge set my pie and coffee down in front of me. The aroma of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. I took a bite of the pie. It was perfect, as always. Yeah, she's a real go-getter, Jasper said with a proud smile. Her best friend, Fiona, she just moved there a couple of weeks ago to start a new gig. My wife was thrilled to have a familiar face around. I paused. My fork was halfway to my mouth. Fiona. I swallowed the pie. It suddenly felt heavy, dense, in my stomach. Fiona? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. My Lyra's best friend is named Fiona. Small world. Embley. Jasper chuckled. Probably not the same one. Unless your Lyra's friend is a brilliant, and I mean brilliant, software architect who just took a massive job with a tech firm in London. My blood ran cold. That was her. That was Fiona's job. The one Lyra had been so excited for her about. I forced a smile. Ah, no, different Fiona, then. I lied. The rest of the conversation was a blur. I heard words. I nodded. I smiled. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. It was replaying the scene from an hour ago. Lyra in the red dress. The high heels. The new perfume. Just dinner with Fiona. But Fiona is in London. Jasper stopped fiddling with the napkin. He must have seen the change in my expression, because he looked at me with a mix of surprise and confusion. Everything okay, man? I blinked, pulling myself back to the surface. Yeah, just, long day. Thinking about a project at work. Inside me, a faint and constant noise had started, like an alarm, too far away to disturb the whole house, but just close enough to be heard. A low, persistent hum of wrongness. I changed the subject, asked him more about his wife, thanked him for the company. I left the diner earlier than usual, leaving half the pie and a full cup of coffee on the table. I got into my car and just sat there for a while. The engine was off. The streetlights cast long shadows into the quiet interior. That single piece of information spun in my head. A puzzle piece that didn't just not fit. It belonged to an entirely different puzzle. Fiona is in London, and Lyra had said she was going to have dinner with her. Something was wrong. I tried to find another explanation. Maybe I misheard. Maybe Lyra meant a different Fiona. But I knew she didn't. There was only one Fiona in her life. Her childhood best friend. The red dress. The high heels. The rush to leave. The kiss on the forehead. Everything had seemed so normal, until it didn't. I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the darkness. But I was in no hurry to go home. It was around 11 when the front door finally opened. I was on the couch. The TV was on, some random late-night show, but my eyes were fixed on a point on the wall just beyond it. I hadn't moved for hours. Lyra came in on light steps, holding her heels in her hand. She smiled, a tired but happy smile, as if returning from any ordinary night out. She dropped her purse on the sideboard, tossed her shoes in the corner with a soft thud, and sighed. The food at that new Italian place was terrible, she said, moving around the living room, straightening a cushion, picking up a magazine. But Fiona is so excited about this new personal project she's starting. We just lost track of time talking about life. She spoke as if she were recounting any triviality. Her movements were fluid, easy, as if nothing was out of place. I just looked at her. I said. There was no anger in my voice. No coldness. It was surgical neutrality, a complete absence of emotion. I was a scientist observing a specimen. I was testing a theory, testing how far she could sustain the lie. Lyra, perhaps confident because I seemed so calm, continued. She recounted a funny thing the waiter had said, mentioned the terrible traffic on the way back, complained about how hot the restaurant was, and then she said it. "Oh, Fiona sends her regards." I just nodded slightly. I picked up the remote and turned up the TV volume a little. She stayed there for a few more minutes, observing me out of the corner of her eye. I could feel her gaze. Maybe she was waiting for a question, a comment, any reaction at all, but I remained silent, steady, like someone watching a movie they had already seen 100 times. Inside, I felt the weight of every false word she had spoken. Each lie was a stone being dropped into a deep well inside my chest. But outwardly, I maintained the composure of a man about to write a new story. A story she didn't even dream she would no longer be the protagonist of. When she finally went to bed, I stayed in the living room, staring at the ceiling. The low hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. The alarm I'd heard in my car was no longer faint. It was loud now, blaring, and I was sure of what I needed to do. From then on, all that was left was planning. The next morning, I woke up before the 6:05 alarm. I lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling in the pre-dawn gloom. The pieces that had seemed loose the night before were now fitting together. My mind was clear, calm. I heard Lyra moving around in the next room. She was humming softly while getting ready for work, as if the world was in perfect, harmonious order. That's when I decided I would not discover what I needed to through confrontations or fights. There would be no shouting matches, no tearful accusations. It would be with silence and method. Lyra had left her phone charging in the kitchen overnight, as she always did. It was part of her chaos, part of my routine to unplug it for her before I left. I worked with refrigeration technology. I was skilled with systems, with software, with apps. I understood how things worked. During breakfast, while she was in the shower, I acted. My hands were steady. My movements were quick, discreet, efficient. I installed a tracking app on her phone. Nothing too invasive, just a simple GPS locator, just enough to know where she was. When she said she was somewhere else, it took less than 2 minutes. I hid the app's icon in a folder filled with useless pre-installed software she never opened. When she came out, hair wrapped in a towel, I was sitting at the table, sipping my coffee, reading the news on my own phone. I finished my breakfast. I kissed her cheek. I wished her a good day. And I left for work, just like always. The plan was now in motion.